Welcome to Pune International Center. I'm Abhay Vaidya, Director PIC, and I would like to request the chairperson for today's event, Dr. Girish Bapat, Director Jnana Prabhodhini Trust, to please come on the stage. May we also have our main speaker for today, Mr. Nilesh Nimkar, Director Quest Foundation, to please come on stage, along with the well-known scholar, Professor Abhay Tilak, the discussant for today's program. The 2.5 years of the COVID-19 pandemic were among the most horrific and devastating calamities that the world has witnessed in living memory. No other calamity that we can recall in our lifetime was as devastating as COVID, which has gripped the entire world. In January 2020, India saw its first case of COVID 19 in Kerala, and the lockdown began in March 2020. We went through the first wave, then the second wave, also known as Delta wave, and then the third wave with variant, from which we are just about recovering. We get news from China about the COVID pandemic still in strength, and one really doesn't know how this virus and its variants are behaving. On the positive side, we had the vaccine development and the vaccination drives. As happens in all calamities, it is the poor who were hit the hardest. There was a health crisis, an unemployment crisis, and an education crisis, with school children suffering the most. Mr. Nilesh Nimkar is Director, Quest Foundation. Quest stands for Quality Education Support Trust, and he, along with his colleagues, Ms. Mitali Thatte and Pranjal Korane, undertook a study among 6th and 7th class students in ashram schools in Nashik district to measure learning loss. It is best that we hear about this study and the strategies proposed to recover the learning loss from Mr. Nimkar himself. We are also honored to have with us the eminent educationist Dr. Girish Bapat, Director Jnana Prabhodhini, as the chair for today's event. Dr. Bapat has dedicated his life to education. He has a doctorate degree in organic chemistry from the University of Victoria, Canada, and also holds a master's degree in education and a postgraduate diploma in business management. We are grateful for the presence of the well-known scholar, Professor Abhay Tilak. Professor Tilak is an economist and the Honorary Director of the Indian School of Political Economy. I am also delighted that we have Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale with us, founder trustee of PIC, who is leading the educational initiatives at MES. I shall now request Dr. Bapat to kindly present his opening remarks and initiate the discussion. So, over to you.
I thank the officials of Pune International Center for arranging this event, recovering learning loss caused by COVID-19. Many organizations have conducted surveys to find out the effects of the total lockdown of schools during the COVID pandemic. In most of the schools all over the country, academic years 2021 and 21-22 could not be completed as planned. We have to use the empirical data, which is representative, as well as personal experience, which is illustrative, to plan for recovery of the learning loss caused by COVID 19. The experiences are different for urban and rural schools, for private and government schools, but there has been a loss of learning everywhere. The loss is of two types. Learning has not occurred as much as it takes place during normal times. That is the first type of loss. Secondly, in many cases, previously learned content and skills have been forgotten. Even during normal times, many students are below the expected achievement level for their particular class. During the pandemic, the number of students slightly and well above the class level has increased at some places. Most of the surveys conducted have taken reading and writing skills, level of understanding of mother tongue and or English, and mathematics as indicators of learning achievement. Apart from mastering the content and skills in academic curriculum, physical fitness of many students has decreased. Many students are facing psychic and emotional challenges. We are interested in understanding the learning losses so that we can plan for recovery of these losses and make up for the lost years and the academic progress of the students. During the various surveys, it was found that in spite of lockdown, about 5 to 15% students are above their class level in academic achievement. This has happened for the students who are fortunate in getting the digital dividend. They got this dividend because of their economic position, their geographical location, or due to quick response by their schools and families to the situation in switching over to digital education. Many students were also at par of the class levels in achievement because of the same above reasons. So now there is discussion going on how to make the teaching digitally able and how to make the infrastructure at schools and homes digitally friendly. If we think of learning as only academic learning, the way to go will be of increase in digitalization of the teaching learning process. But I think that at the pre-primary, primary, secondary and higher secondary classes, the physical and emotional losses that have occurred during the pandemic will also have to be covered. Today's main speaker, Dr. Nilesh Nimkar, he is working mainly in rural and tribal areas. So he will be presenting a different picture from what I have just said in the opening remarks, and that is more important. And out of the 25 crore school going children, maybe 15 to 20 crore students will be of that type. So it will be very interesting to find what he has learned from his surveys and his study. I invite him to make his main presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bapat, for setting the tone of this entire presentation. First of all, I would like to thank Pune International Center for giving me this opportunity to interact with all of you. And I will try to keep the presentation as short as possible and probably take this session ahead through the interaction and the question answers kind of a format. Basically, the loss due to the pandemic is of various natures, and the first and foremost loss is about the socio-emotional well-being of children. So what has happened is that in the rural areas, we can really see that girls, especially those who are in say grade 8, 9, 10, because of the 2 years of school closure, a lot of them were married off. And these are the kind of losses which are, which goes really beyond the scope of this kind of a study. But I must mention them over here because I have been living in the rural areas, working with these children. And without mentioning this, I don't think that, this the numbers that I'm going to present would make a great sense. a school in a rural area is not just a place to learn the academic subjects. It is much more than that. So, for example, because the girl is in the school, because she is in the ashram school, her age of marriage gets prolonged. Because of the midday meals programs, because of the food that is supplied over there, there is a sort of a nutritional balance that is struck over there. And I'm not just talking from anecdotes, but hard data has also shown that when the children are in the school, because of the timely food intake, their weight and other parameters improve. So these are all sorts of benefits which we really get from the school apart from our academic learning. And that's why it is very important, at least in the rural tribal belts, that the school keep running. I know that it was a very unprecedented situation and everybody was afraid, clueless. There was not much knowledge available. And still, if we really, if we really face this kind of a situation for another time, keeping the schools closed has a lot of cost. One has to really now interact with the health professionals and explain them these kind of things that, by keeping the schools closed, what are we losing on? And then one will have to see the trade-off between the two. Having said that, I would like to present our small study, which actually was not planned as such, but we had an opportunity to do this study and that's why we took it and went ahead. While the entire sample of our study is from one tribal belt, that is in Nashik, the findings could be generally applied to, at least to the tribal belts of Maharashtra, and some of the parts can be also applied to the rural India or rural Maharashtra at least. So taking that into account, let's see what exactly we have done until now. So our organization, Quality Education Support Trust, runs a program. This is pre-COVID, which is called Anupad. The program is aiming at those children who trail severely behind their grade levels. So what we exactly do is that we administer a good diagnostic test which was developed by us, and now we have been using it for almost for the past 8 years. The government of Maharashtra has also used it across 35 blocks across Maharashtra. And basis on this test, what we try to do is that we group children for some time during the day to get an appropriate level of input. And the idea is that with that kind of an input, children would progress further. The problem, just to illustrate this problem, is that I'm a 6th grade student. I'm sitting in the 6th grade. The teacher is teaching me, say, indices, and I'm still not able to multiply and divide. That could be the case. Or I'm supposed to really, read a hefty textbook of history, and I'm still not able to really comprehend even a simple small passage. That could be the case, and it's a very rampant thing. In common terms, this kind of a program would be called as a remedial program. I strongly disagree with the term remedial here, because the remediation is strictly in educational terms is done after first good teaching. And in any given population, you would not find more than, say, 6 to 8% of children who would require this kind of remediation. But when we started doing this program, what we found was that, as many as 60%, 70% of the class requires some kind of an input. Now, this clearly shows that this is something what is different than remediation. So the term we coined for this was level-based learning program. Whatever might be the reason, what we have to do is that identify a correct learning level of the child and start from there and give systematic input so that the children can cope with their grade levels. So next. So one such Anupat program was, one cycle of Anupat program was getting over in Nashik district. So the red boundary that you can see are the 3 blocks. One is Igatpuri, Trambakeshwar and Sanna. So that was the belt where we really were working. And just in February 2020, we had a cycle of Anupat program completed over there. And that's why there was a sort of an end test done with these children. So we actually exactly knew that what these children know in February 2020. Post which in March the lockdown struck and the schools were closed. Now, after ashram schools were one of the institutions to close the first and they reopened the last. Because, reopening an ashram school is not that easy. You have to, look at the logistics supply chains are to be established. Then, some of them were converted into COVID centers. So all these odds, with all these odds, probably ashram schools had the longest school closure per se. And that's why we decided that, let's see that after, say, about 11 months, what is the status of these children. So if we really see over here, so in February 19, if you really see, the average scores at the beginning were 19, 31, and then they had gone to 47.8, which is almost close to 50. Generally, the creator of the tests have set a bar at 50%. That means that if you cross 50% on this particular test, your chances of coping with your grade levels are very high. If you cross, say, around 60-75%, then you don't need any special input. You are just like a normal child who can go and attend the class. The variation further that is a very normal variation. But if you are below 40, it's a red alarm. And if you really see, the average in the beginning was just 19% score on this particular test. And towards the end of February 20, we had reached that bar of 50%. So the project was planned for 3 years. So there was one more year to work. And had we got that year, probably the average would have pushed even further up. With mathematics, if you really see, it started at 22 and by end of February, it was around 42% as an average. Now, here, if you see both the graphs, there is a clear increase that you can see that has happened over these 2 years. Let's see now what exactly happened when the schools were closed. So after this, the schools got closed and go back. So there were around 1,400 children whom we had tested in February 2020. But when we decided to conduct this study, it was not possible to reach out to all of them because these children come from 500 odd villages. So we were working in 18 schools, 18 residential ashram schools run by Tribal Development Department, and children come there from almost 500 villages. So it was very difficult to reach out to them because they were not in the school, they were at home. And how do we really select a sample then for that? So what we decided that we shortlisted all those villages which had at least 5 children, because logistically it would have been really difficult for us to go to one village and collect data from one child or 2 children. So we got around 83 villages which had children, which had more than 5 children. From that, randomly we selected the villages, and whichever villages were selected, we went there and tried to test as many children as possible. So that is how the whole testing was done in the given area. So towards the end of our data collection round, we could get around roughly 400 children whom we could assess with a parallel test. So the test was not the same. We have a battery of tests which has parallel tests. So they were assessed with a parallel test just to check that what is the status after about 11 months. Can we go next? So in language, if you see what has happened, it is 46% was our starting point when the lockdown struck. And if you see, it has come back to around 34%. Yeah. So a sharp decline can be seen over here. Can you go to the next slide? In mathematics, if you see, the starting point was not so high. It was 36% and it went down to again 11% or so. The clear indication was there that, children have clearly forgotten something. So we were interested in knowing that what is it that is really causing this decline. Have they forgotten everything that they had learned, or are there certain peculiar areas in which the backslide is more? And that's why we decided to go further down into the test and see that what are the areas that have suffered the most. So let's see. So one of the key competency that children have lost is the reading comprehension. And by reading comprehension, I do not mean understanding a very simple text, but a complex reading comprehension that is generally required to understand other academic subjects. So reading and understanding by reading is a very core and fundamental competency for all formal education. You can't imagine today a course to be run for those people who cannot read and write. And that's why it is a very fundamental competency. And if you lose that, it is obvious that your performance in all other subjects would also automatically go down, because you're struggling with meaning making at the basic level. And if you really see, there was a sort of a 18% backslide in the simple reading comprehension competencies, while there was a great backslide of about 43% in complex reading comprehension. Now, when I'm using these terms, simple reading comprehension and complex meaning comprehension, let's see a couple of examples of what do I mean by these terms, because these are not very standard terms. We had coined them for our study. So, if I get a passage of, I'm talking about children in grade 5, 6 and 7. If I give a passage of this level to the child and ask a simple question that, की गेल्या वर्षी रमेशच्या शेतामध्ये कडधान्य कमी का पिकलं, so there is a straight answer given into the passage, and that's what we broadly define as simple reading comprehension. A, the passage is fairly simple. It is from your own backgrounds or own immediate environment, and the questions asked are fairly simple, whereby you can, if you understand basic things, you can really answer that kind of a question. And this has been an integral part of our program, because in the beginning, children would really, deal at this level of reading comprehension. Then let me just show you an example of what we do. What do I mean by complex reading comprehension? So here is it's a news, a sort of fabricated news from a fabricated newspaper, and the question asked is that, would there be a busy road in front of the Kudus ZP school about which this news is, and how did you decide that? Can you point out the evidence from the news article? Now, this is the kind of questions, I mean, this is not the only question, but these are the kind of questions which we consider to be a complex reading comprehension ability. So, in the text, nowhere it is mentioned that there is a big road with the traffic and all that. However, from the interviews that the reporter has given in the news, one can definitely make out that there must be a road which has a heavy traffic, and that's why the parents were worried. So this is like understanding the entire text in totality and try to extract meaning out of it, which is not very obvious, which is not stated over there very clearly. And this is what we mean by complex reading comprehension. So the test that we use has both type of questions, and we segregated them together, and what we found was that what they lost was this type of a ability. Now, this is a very fundamental ability. If you don't read well, it is really difficult to do anything formally in the schools. The success in the schooling largely depends on your reading comprehension, because that being the medium to understand everything else, you are heavily dependent on it. And that's why the idea was to really strengthen these basic abilities through Anupad, which got strengthened to an extent. We can see that from our results, but they slid back very fast. The question was that, why did this happen? And I'm not going to establish any causal relationship by data as such, but I would still like to share with you the field observations which our researchers did, and probably that also explains that, why this backslide is so evident over here. So along with our data collection rounds, what we tried to do was that we send a few researchers to sit in the village, say for 3 days, 4 days altogether, and observe the sort of a daily routine of the children. What they found was that generally these are smaller villages. So obviously the COVID, once the peak was subsided, these villages had no cases, and then we could really approach them. There was a little sort of resistance in the beginning that we were coming from outside, so people were a little worried about. But somehow the ashram school teachers helped us to go and meet up with the people. The first demand that came from the parents when we went over there was that की आहे ना काहीतरी शिकवा. अख्खा दिवस ही मुलं नदीमध्ये जातात, इकडे जात आहेत, तिकडे जात आहेत, कधीतरी थोडी मध्ये घरामध्ये मदत करतात, पण दॅट्स नॉट समथिंग वॉट वी रिअली वॉन्ट. And we want them to learn. Now the schools are closed. So what do they do otherwise? And if you see that there was very little print available in the environment. So no newspapers, no books. Many of the children would really have only textbooks to their disposal as a reading material. And when you really grow up in what we call as a print deficit environment, your abilities of comprehension go back very fast. Because they are, when they are in the school, they have this kind of an environment. So as long as they are in that environment, they can do it. The moment you go out for a longer time from the school away, this is a fairly long time. 11 months is a very long time. And if you haven't done anything of that sort, say for 11 months, you naturally tend to lose that ability. And that's why what we found was that there is hardly anything else than the textbooks at home to really read. And one of the reasons that this is speculation, I don't have a data for this, but one of the reasons that why the complex reading comprehension suffered so badly is this. That there is hardly any exposure to reading. Reading requires a certain kind of a cognitive process to happen at the back of your mind, and if you're not really doing that process over and again, you tend to lose that ability. And this is not simple forgetting. It's not that they did not forget letters, they did not forget how to read, they did not forget matra and these kind of things. What they lost was this critical ability to extract meaning from the text. And I think that is something what is a very alarming situation. Unless they regain this ability back, it would be in vain pushing them to do all the academics that we expect to be done in a particular grade. Now during these 1.5, 2 years, I would say safely 2 years, because there was a small window in between when we had when this thing was open, but we can safely assume that for the 2 years they were away from the school, barring that small window. So during these 2 years, they have gone up by 2 grades. So the one who was in grade 6 is now in grade 8, has lost this ability, and now is supposed to directly cope with grade 8 level text. So you can imagine the result is pre-decided already. Can we go ahead? So what we tried to do was that, is it really possible to give some kind of an input? Everybody was really talking about going digital, making some kind of input available at the Basti level, at the Pada level. However, one must understand that this is not a plan A. Probably this is a plan C, not even B. Yeah, so plan B should be try to reopen the schools as fast as possible with the consultation with the health experts. But even that did not happen. So we had to depend on a plan C, which was something like this. So can you go back? Yeah. So what we devised was an 11-unit program, and we tried to implement it with about 200 students who were in the villages. The photos that you can see over here are a little funny because they are wearing the mask on our instruction. Otherwise, they were all together sitting over there. But we were strictly instructed, because anything that is to be done informally must have, you have to take enough precautions. So we used to carry masks with them. They give them the mask, ask them to sit wearing the mask over there. But this was the kind of situation that was happening, and we were trying to give them input over there. Unfortunately, what happened that we started with 5 villages and 2 schools with about 200 students over there. What happened actually was that immediately after we started, the second wave hit, and we had to discontinue this. Post which we tried to really, somehow reach out to about 60 children in a digital manner. And we tried to continue the input in a digital mode, what to say. Let's see what the impact that we got. So let me just first clarify that what do I mean by digital online instruction. Number one, these villages are so remote that a direct video conferencing is absolutely not possible. I mean, you can't even connect for 2 minutes. The connectivity will drop. The call will immediately drop. So what we tried to do was that we sent them some videos, pre-recorded videos of teaching, along with the WhatsApp interface, along with the exercises on WhatsApp. So because that was the only medium available over there through which we could be in touch with them. So one was that we make a phone call to the child, talk to the child directly, or send certain material on the WhatsApp. So this was the only sort of contact between the teacher and the child over there. And whatever I'm talking about is not a very what you call extraordinary situation. This has been the situation of many more students, and this has been the general situation. So the way Dr. Bapat mentioned right now, only a few fortunate had this luxury of having interaction online and at least seeing their teacher's face, or at least being regularly engaged with the teacher, being able to talk to their teachers. Here it was a very sort of fragmented input that we could really give them. It was a very well planned input. As an educator, I can guarantee you that if I implement that course in the actual face-to-face mode, you will definitely get good results. The challenge was that can somebody really implement this in this way, the way we tried to do it. So let's see what happened. So some children, about 60 children, got online plus face-to-face both kind of input, which is around 60. If you see, the average from January to September just rose marginally by 2-3%. And again, this is not a statistically significant growth. So practically no change in it. Those who got only face-to-face and no online, if you see, even the average has marginally increased over there. And those who got no input, they have also increased marginally by 2%, which is a very, coincidence kind of increase that you can see. In short, none of our inputs worked. And that is something which is a failure, which I want to share with all of you. While we are talking about investing in online modes, unless we really do robust trials, unless we really take up robust pilot, how sensible would it be to really, invest in that? Because all said and done, the IT connectivity kind of an infrastructure is a very capital intensive investment. It requires a huge amount of investment in the beginning to ensure a connectivity of, a fairly good level. I live in a village for the past 27 years, and still I'm not able to get I have not managed to get a constant connectivity over there, in spite of spending good amount on it every month. Now, considering this, if we really want to go ahead with this kind of an idea that we should be investing into this, the suggestion that I would like to make over here is that unless we pilot it in a robust way, this investment might go just waste. Because with all our sincere efforts, with the current kind of connectivity, we did not get much. The face-to-face impact, the face-to-face interaction had some impact, but it was for a very short period of time. So it's almost negligible at that point of time. And that's why it is necessary to undertake good quality pilot studies before we make these kind of investments. It's a very attractive proposition to talk about, having a digital online school. But if you really look at the conditions of our ashram schools, you will find that there is no water for you to drink, and we are installing a TV screen on the wall of a classroom, which costs you, probably 10 times more than a simple water tank. So what should be our priority is the question that we have to ask ourselves. I'm absolutely not against using digital medium. I mean, probably I can proudly I can tell you that our organization uses technology in a much, much robust way, probably even after being in the rural areas. However, what is it that we are going to use needs to be tested very rigorously, very, diligently before going ahead with this kind of investment. Otherwise, they may prove waste. Can you go ahead? Yeah. Now, after this entire study, the paper was published in DCPCR's journal, the Children First. So the Delhi Commission for Protection of Children's Right had announced a COVID special issue, and this was one of the studies that they publish under the COVID issue. So what have been the general recommendations from the studies was that, sort of give priority to face-to-face interaction over any other kind of instruction. Because, at least in the primary grades, where children are still learning and acquiring their foundational skills, while they are still, learning the foundational abilities, hurriedly switching the mode of instruction could be completely detrimental. The National Stock Exchange Foundation has also done certain studies in various tribal belts. And what we found was that there were about 6 to 7 interventions that they studied. The best results were there where they asked the person to go into the basti and teach. No other mode has been, as effective as going and directly interacting with the kids, even for cognitive part of it. Another thing that I would like to bring to your notice is that the government has announced a big program called Setu Program, whereby children were expected to undergo certain input so that they make up for the learning loss. The unfortunate part of this idea was that the number of days were pre-decided. 40 दिवसामध्ये लॉस भरून निघाला पाहिजे. If that is the thing with which I start, 40 दिवसात लॉस भरून निघेल कागदावर. That's the problem. So giving this kind of targets, one does not need to understand much of science of education for that. How one can sit in Pune and really say that all children across the state in 40 days would cover this. The best way would be really to trust our teachers, give them the sort of diagnostic test to use for their own purpose, and help them to plan well for their own classrooms, because our classrooms is not a very homogeneous group. The classrooms, you can have a classroom from any English medium school here in Pune, and you can have a classroom at my place. They are not the same situations. So the same solution will not be useful. It's a very commonsensical thing. Now, how to devise the solutions in our area is a challenge which we have to take. But the clear idea is that one jacket fits for all kind of a strategy is not going to work. The other thing is that this entire what you call rush to make up the learning loss is going to be very counterproductive. Because if we start using the data rather than for understanding the situation to control it, then it is very detrimental. So by this I mean that, if I give a target to some teacher that your children have to perform in 40 days to this level, the poor teacher doesn't have any other alternative than make them perform in the test. And these are the kind of problems that we every day see on the ground. What we really need to do is that think about it as a long-term issue, because there is no reason to believe that what has been lost over 2 years can be made up in 30 days or 40 days. It has to be a continuous process. Probably next coming 2 years we have to be really judicious enough to focus on certain abilities which are very critical to the learning, and then go ahead. It cannot be done mechanically. So practically you cannot have a sort of a Setu program for history. There is no need for it, because the history in grade 5 is completely different than history in grade 4. So there is no Setu program for that. So this kind of a oversimplification of the ideas that, teach something from the previous grade and go ahead is not going to work. Situation is fairly complex, and let's really, understand it with its complexity. While presenting this, I don't want to say that, the situation is hopeless. It is definitely a lot could be done. However, the first thing that we would recommend to do is that, decentralize the decision-making process. What is happening today is that if I get a day and hour by hour plan from the state to be implemented, does the teacher have a courage to cross it and do what he wants to do? So these are the kind of things that are happening, that if I'm given a day by day plan and hour by hour plan, I will teach irrespective of the needs of the children. And the needs of the children are so diverse that we have to teach our teachers to assess them quickly and give them a program which could really fix certain things. Everything cannot be fixed in a short period of time, but have a long-term view of, say, about 2 years, whereby children get certain basic abilities back and then they start working on their grade appropriate level curriculum. The another thing is that, generally, if we are talking about residential schools, it is very difficult to restart the school. And that's why it is necessary, even if we face this kind of a situation once more, the Zilla Parishad schools, which are non-residential, they can be rebooted very quickly because they are not residential and a lot of other logistics issues are not there. So there has to be a sort of a communication between the tribal development department and the education department, so that the children who are technically been enrolled into the tribal schools or in the residential schools can be temporarily admitted into the Zilla Parishad schools nearby. Because at least by that, you can ensure some continuity of learning over there. Whatever I'm suggesting is not a very foolproof solution. I'm aware about that. My approach is that, what best what best could be done given the situation and given the ground realities. Another important idea is that, especially if children are coming from non-literate homes, it is very critical, as a matter of fact, that you make some kind of reading material available at home. And if that is, that's not a very difficult task, I guess, because, the material could be circulated, some circulating libraries could be established at their level. But apart from your textbook and a workbook, you must get something over and above to read and comprehend, without which it is in vain expecting them to really, retain these abilities. Their own life and day-to-day routine doesn't require this. This is something what is required in the school. So school has to make it sure that, something goes into at the home and they continue their reading process at home. So these were some general recommendations which I have picked up from the long paper that we submitted to the journal. Obviously, there is a lot more data that we have crunched and tried to gain some more finer insights which are technical in nature, might be useful more for the teachers rather than a general audience. But taking this into account, I would like to stop here and open the forum for the discussion, and probably we can take this ahead from here. So once again, thank you very much for giving this opportunity to talk here. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Now I invite Dr. Abhay Tilak to give his comments and respond to what Dr. Nilesh Nimkar has been talking to us.
Just a small correction. I haven't done my PhD and neither do I intend to do it. So I'm just Mr. Nilesh Nimkar. That's good enough.
Honorary Dr. Nilesh Nimkar.
Good evening, Chairperson Dr. Bapat, Nilesh and friends. Actually, I am thankful to Nilesh to remind me that I am also not a doctor, although it's written over there that Dr. Tilak. So I have not earned my PhD, and now the possibility is far, far remote of doing it. So I am also only Abhay. Actually, I am extremely thankful to Pune International Center for organizing this interaction, because I believe that whatever understanding I have of this particular platform, PIC, I think this was the right medium through which the dissemination exercise of this survey to be presented to a larger audience, because as a student of economics, I sincerely believe that this is an ideal case of what we call as a policy research, an empirical research which brings out very clear-cut directions for coming out with an appropriate, effective policy response for any kind of a corrective measures to be initiated for correcting anomalies in the real life situation. So I'm really thankful to Nilesh and his team. Without taking much time, I'll make only about 4 or 5 observations which I think have a bearing not only on the presentation but they touch upon contours of a larger reality. See, this whole whatever glimpses of learning losses which have occurred or which have been inflicted on us because of pandemic. The first thing is they are not only thought-provoking, they are deeply disturbing. Particularly the opening remarks that Nilesh made about a major impact besides learning loss is advancement of age at marriage of basically girl children in schools. And the other dimension which it actually didn't occur to me even till he made the point about closure of schools impacting nutritional status or food intake because of the midday program. See, why I say this is because I was reminded of a World Development Report. Maybe it was published about 4 or 5 years ago. I don't recollect the exact year, which talked about lack of balanced diet, poor nutrition at an early stage of development, and its enduring impact on brain development at later stages. And the empirical data collected from different corners of the world, which was compiled in that annual report published by the World Bank, it very forcefully brought to the surface the fact that there are several instances where lack of nutritious food intake for a sustained period in early stages of development of a child seem to have a long-standing, long-term impact on the cognitive abilities of the brain, particularly with respect to learning abilities and ability to think in long terms. So our whole thinking process gets compressed. Particularly the findings or data which was reported therein, which pertain to remote areas of some of the African countries or even some of the Southeast Asian countries, they very clearly underline this fact that the overall development of brain is its relation to food intake at an early stage of development and how it affects the overall economic performance of an individual over a long time in terms of lifetime income earned. So this dimension I was completely unaware that the sustained closure of schools for 2 years affecting food intake and therefore probably the overall growth, because these are all ashram chalas, means look at the age group of the children. So I think that this is a serious loss besides the dimensions of learning loss that this particular study has highlighted. Same thing is applicable for the average age at marriage, basically of girl, because there is ample evidence which suggests that not only the physical development of the girl, but early age, early motherhood, lack of nutrition, underdeveloped fetus, its impact on cognitive abilities of the brain, and basically discontinuation of education at an early stage having an impact on the overall social status of the woman in the family as far as decision making is concerned. Everything gets affected. So I think besides learning losses, these two causes which are inherently human in nature, that there's a heavy dropout of girl children because of closure, girls getting married at an early stage, and the entire life cycle or life pattern of the girl undergoes a drastic change. I think these are two long lasting and serious implications. As far as learning loss is concerned, see, when Nilesh was mentioning about I'll make only 2 or 3 points because we ought to have some discussion and questions from the audience. See, when the reality regarding digital connectivity, the kind of problems through online learning. See, I was reminded of an excellent lecture delivered by one of the renowned literary figures of Maharashtra, a great novelist, winner of a Sahitya Akademi Award, Mr. Rajan Gavas. He delivered a similar, or rather he narrated a similar account of how COVID has impacted overall rural Maharashtra, particularly some districts in the southern part of the state, Kolhapur, Sangli, and the whole belt of Krishna. One of the major factors which he highlighted in the beginning itself, he said that COVID has led to massive indebtedness in large number of villages. See, again, as an ordinary student of economics, I was completely startled because we are accustomed to reading news about loss of employment, loss of income earning abilities, livelihood, particularly in large cities because of the reverse migration. So, informal sector getting badly affected, people losing jobs, the whole informal economy in the large cities getting completely uprooted. We were accustomed to the kind of economic hardships inflicted because of this dimension of COVID. But the rural indebtedness was completely a new thing to me. But the fact he mentioned there has a close bearing or is another dimension of the whole area of digital learning. What Mr. Gavas said is that the fact that schools could not be opened, there was no physical conduct of classes, students were perforce had to depend on online learning. That made the family to buy what we call the smartphone. And for basically an agricultural laborer, for a footloose laborer in the rural area, a petty craftsman, what we call the village artisans, even buying a smartphone forced him to take a recourse to borrowing money from the private money lender. Now, juxtapose this reality with the utilization of that facility as Nilesh has highlighted. That even after incurring huge expenditure, which is financed through borrowings and that too from private money lender at exorbitantly high rates of interest, even if the amount is small, 10,000, 12,000, 15,000. But that is not sufficient because imagine a family where there are 2 or 3 children in different age cohorts attending different grades. They need a similar facility at the same time perhaps. So it's not sufficient that you buy only one handset of smartphone, you need at least 2. So a minimum expenditure of 25,000 rupees. So rural indebtedness, the facility of any kind of institutional credit being completely denied. So there is no other way but to land at the doors of the private money lender. And on the top of that, as the study undertaken by Nilesh has highlights, that if Even after doing this, we are going to have serious problems regarding connectivity. Then what is it that we are heading for? I think that's a huge question that I think the study very ably underlines. That look at connectivity. Mr. Gavas was narrating instances after instances where the children would be forced to climb high up in the trees because there the remote connectivity will come. The children would spend the whole day there. It's a pathetic situation. And then if basic very very poor connectivity in remote villages which are located in different terrain, in difficult terrain, how are we going to find out a solution to this? And this then brings us to a larger question that nowadays I think all of us are enamored by the fact of digital learning, and digital learning as a new wave, new mode of imparting learning or teaching or schooling. If we look at this data, then the question naturally arises is that do we treat digital learning or digital schooling as a supplementary to what we call the offline face-to-face teaching, or are we looking at it as a substitute? And if it is a substitute, then I think it's a grave thing, because the kind of this access or this facility is probably open to, let's say, if the average level of urbanization in Maharashtra today is around 45%. Let us take a maximum 50%. So 50% of at least urban children, let's say, that have access to any kind of a facility of online learning. But what about remaining 50%? And coupled with this reality that the basic ability to buy a requisite instrument, poor connectivity, the kind of loss which has been, I think the most serious one was regarding comprehension. Because at least whatever little exposure I have had, and that too again because of we at the school, we conducted a mammoth study of the schooling system conducted by Pune Municipal Corporation. And about 300 odd schools that we surveyed, Nilesh and his team, they were associated with this study. They also highlight the same fact that even when the COVID was unheard of, because the study was conducted way back in 2008, even then it highlighted this reality that if the linguistic abilities of children remain underdeveloped, they have a great impact on overall comprehension, which affects their overall performance in all subjects, not only languages. Because if you don't understand the language, or if you don't are unable to draw a correct inference from a written text, even you will not be able to understand the mathematical problem which is expressed in words. So understanding of not only of language, but mathematics, science, history, any subject remains underdeveloped if the basic ability of comprehension is affected. And I think that is another harsh dimension of reality which this study has basically thrown at us. And the last question, where the note on which he ended his presentation, I think the biggest challenge would be whether we go by the government diktat of recovering this learning loss in 40 days, or whether, as the study has postulated, that we should have some kind of an implementation mechanism or a strategy spread over minimum 2 years. I think the real question is, because one major observation that the study has, or the recommendation that he seems to have made, seems to be making, is that the whole process of recovering this learning loss should be made highly decentralized, because the regional, linguistic, locational, medium specific, age specific dimensions of learning loss are bound to be varied, bound to be different. So the solution and the intervention has to be designed and implemented locally with local expertise and local inputs. Now, for me as an outsider, the biggest challenge is this exercise or these inputs will have to be necessarily designed and implemented by teachers at respective facilities. How do we equip teachers to do that? Because understanding the learning loss across a stratified and completely diversified group of children with different backgrounds, language, age, family structure, the educational or social status of parents, access to learning methods and learning techniques or learning equipments. Given all these things, how does the teacher actually there, how do we equip the teacher to assess the depth, extent and nature of loss which has occurred at the level of his school, and then equip him to undertake remedial measures? I think that's going to be a really a systemic issue. And the last point which struck me very intensely is the whole issue about absence of print material, basically in rural areas, because as we know that everything was closed. We had no newspapers, no magazines, nothing. Even in cities we were basically devoid or denied those facilities. I think that brings out a huge it highlights in a major way the necessity to spread really a movement to establish, conduct and run rural libraries. Because let's pray to God that we don't have to face this kind of an unprecedented situation again. But this seems to be a very, very essential and bare necessity, that besides digital spread, I think what we need is creating institutions or platforms where highly readable print material is available of a variety of nature, of different subjects, different walks of life and different areas of knowledge. I think these are some of the salient features of reality, and the kind of damage, I would say, that COVID has caused or has inflicted on us. I think the situation is, although he has sounded on a very optimistic note, I think the challenge is really very serious, because I think the COVID has hit at the basic foundation of our learning. I think that is what that is how I comprehended the presentation. But once again, I am extremely thankful to Nilesh for and his team actually, because this is not a mean task. If you look at the pictures, it's a very, very challenging task to contact scattered students, sit with them, try to understand their predicament, collect the data, analyze the data, and then draw meaningful inferences with some degree of reliability, what we call as the degrees of confidence. I think it's a very, very demanding task, and I think the entire team at Quest definitely deserves a huge amount of credit, and I'm extremely thankful to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tilak. After excellent presentation by Nilesh Nimkar, we had some social, economical and nutritional aspects of the problem discussed by Shri Abhay Tilak. Now, many of you may be eager to ask questions to Mr. Nilesh Nimkar, but I would like to make few supplementary remarks to what he said. First, I think that we all should make some distinction on online teaching and emergency remote teaching. What he said, Mr. Nimkar said, that we sent material on WhatsApp and sent videos. They are a very organized institution and they must have done it after giving some thought, but there are many teachers who tried to do the same thing, but that was emergency remote teaching, and most of the cases the teachers and students thought that they are well occupied in doing something, but educational gains were not much in that. Online teaching is a very serious business. There has to be proper training of teachers, there has to be technology support, and there has to be a lot of planning of all the lessons which have to be rendered through online teaching. Another thing which I mentioned, and many surveys conducted all over India, even by the government of India and other NGOs, that for recovering learning loss, we have to focus on giving educational support for basic conceptual understanding, and for that, language teaching has to be emphasized in the beginning. At the end, he mentioned that we should not go to online teaching without proper planning. We should try to make print-rich environment in the village homes. Just before COVID, we are doing one project called Vachak Mitra, where we gave supplementary reading material to 5,000 rural students. That material was ready, so we used that, and in one block, in Velhe block, we used it for 1,000 students, and it was like a circulating library, just a 1 or 2 page reading material given at a time. And the students who received that were fortunate that they could keep some contact with print medium. Another addition I can make, because we have been doing that in rural media, and we have found rural areas that, like circulating library, we can have circulating laboratory also. And we have been doing that in about 7 states in India, a project called Jnana, Setu and Chote Scientist. And wherever we give kits to students to do some experiments at home, or suggest what household articles can be used to do various science experiments, their curiosity remains alive. And as soon as the school started, they started recovering their learning losses. So these are the few points which I would like to add to the excellent presentation by Nilesh Nimkar. Now, according to the program, the question and answer session was supposed to end at 6:20. Now it is 6:20, but since we started late, I think we should have some question and answers. And according to the organizers, Ms. Shivata Suryavanshi is going to moderate the question and answer session.
Thank you. I now invite questions for a question answer session. In the interest of time, I would request our chairperson this evening, Dr. Girish Bapat, to please moderate this session. Over to you, sir.
Please tell to whom the question is addressed also.
निलेश निमकर यांना विचारायचं आहे. तुमच्या whatever you said during your presentation, that whoever promulgates ordinances like please cover the loss in 40 days or whatever, so whoever gives such a diktat, whoever issues such a fatwa, are they not advised by the educationists or educators, etc.?
So I have been closely working with the government machinery for a long time, and everybody is under pressure. See, what happens is that we point fingers at the government very fast, and that's why they're under constant pressure. If I don't give this kind of an order, my position is not safe. So holding government alone responsible for this kind of a phenomena is, I think, a completely naive understanding of the situation. This is an unprecedented situation. If we keep on pointing fingers at the government, if we keep them on the gunpoint all the time, these kind of things are going to happen, and that's precisely happens. I know very well meant people working on this, and they discuss me in private saying that kya karnar del lagnar hai. So that positional and systemic compulsions we have to really understand. Secondly, we as a society do not discuss this in a constructive way, including the media. त्याला न्यूज व्हॅल्यू नाही ना काही, म्हणजे कसं शिकवायचं ह्याच्याबद्दल पेपरमध्ये लिहिण्याला काही न्यूज व्हॅल्यू नाही अजिबात आपल्याकडे. So the problem happens is that these are things which are to be solved coming together rather than pointing fingers at somebody. And this is a situation that even best of the educator has not undergone ever. So what the educators can probably do is that suggest certain alternatives. They are to be diligently implemented. If they work, we have to learn from them. If they do not work, constantly we have to keep on improvising them. The problem being that, if this entire target kind of things comes from right from top, the one who issues this ordinance is under complete compulsion. That's what I can see. So why even the person at the topmost position would give this kind of an order? Because we put him at the gunpoint. Ki sarkar ne काय केलं? Sarkar काय करणार? The situation is so complex that by just passing the ball and pointing fingers at each other, we are making it even worse. So the first thing is that do we really discuss ever? I'm really thankful to the institution that you gave me this opportunity to discuss these issues over here. नाही तर आमचं कोण ऐकतं खेड्यामध्ये बसल्यावरती? It's very simple that we don't discuss these things at the level that they should be really discussed. We are not willing to undergo that kind of a complexity, understand that complexity, and there aren't simple situations is the reality which we have to accept. So once we accept it, then people will stop pushing the things under the carpet. You have to trust teachers, you have to trust the machinery. Ultimately, they are the people who are going to do it. So if they are put on the gunpoint, I think that at the end of the day, it is not in the interest of the child at all.
My name is Marshall Gokhale. My question is a little out of your study. What is the model for urban area school that you think their learning loss has been of a similar type, or?
So, surprisingly, after the COVID, a few schools from Mumbai, which are considered to be good Marathi medium schools, approached us. And they told that, we are facing this crisis. We would like to use your test and really assess where our children are. There is definitely a little slight difference if you compare the data to each other. But even over there, the loss is there. Let me just report a few quotes, a few studies over here. In Scandinavia, where the lockdown period was much shorter than us, and the online infrastructure is far superior to what we have, what they found was that the online instruction is broadly useful to retain what they have already learned. However, teaching something new, teachers and students, both of them have challenges for it. So for the referencing work, for the literature review of this particular paper, we underwent a very exhaustive review, whatever we could access. And even in the most modern countries, if they're finding this kind of a loss, in spite of much smaller lockdowns and much better infrastructure, if we don't accept these facts, then, we are fooling ourselves. So in Mumbai, wherever we did the testing, of course, the numbers vary per se, but you can't say that, there is no loss.
No, with Nilesh's permission, I'm just venturing to appreciate the question that Mr. Gokhale has put. Because see, we were, as I said, exposed to the schooling at municipal corporation level in Pune. Now, if I have to refer to that inventory of knowledge which we gathered through that study, my hunch is that probably the learning loss would be more severe or would vary largely depending upon the type of school. Probably it would be relatively less for privately conducted schools where children from altogether different echelons of population are admitted. But if we look at the schools conducted and administered by municipal corporation, where at least the experience in Pune shows that most of the migrant workers, or what we call the floating population, and workers in the informal sector, their wards are admitted in municipal schools, where the education background at the family and basically the education background of the parents itself is poor. Most of them are largely first generation students or individuals in the family to attend the school. So my hunch, with the permission of insights that Nilesh has got, the learning loss would be of qualitatively and quantitatively different for public schools in large cities.
I agree with you completely, Abhay.
So there is a segment which is different. So what you say is applicable maybe for that 20% at least.
Completely agree with him. I mean, we don't have enough data to really show it, but our assessment goes that, I mean, with the migrant laborers, it will be much higher because children have not only lost opportunity to learn, but they are the ones who were hit by severe trauma. So at least my tribal children are in a way lucky that there wasn't any negative impact per se. They were in the nature, they were quite free, they used to go out. There was no social restrictions on them. With the migrant labor, this must have been a huge thing. I mean, and these are the ideas that actually, somebody has to take up and study well. The problem here is that, I mean, a small institution like ours cannot take up this kind of a study. But absolutely it is necessary that we study these ideas, we study these phenomena and really find out that what has happened.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just asking to the question which our friend in the audience posed in the beginning. See, I'm curious to know that we seem to be in a great hurry to do fast forward, right? This with the 40 days, 1 month is a different thing. But I'm curious to know whether parents are also a party to this, that there's a pressure that something should be done at the schools level, that our children have lost 2 years of schooling, offline teaching. So are the parents also a party to this pressure?
So which parents, I would ask? Again, so some of the middle class parents or maybe higher middle class parents may be thinking in that way. Largely in our area, these ideas are not even discussed. I mean, they are anyway discussed in the general society so less. So imagine a village parent who just बंद होत्या शाळा गेला नाही विसरला. Enough. त्याच्या पलीकडे काय बोलणार ते? So the idea is that there is a severe problem which we are going to face. That kind of an andaz or that kind of an estimation needs to be really systematically studied and shared with people in that way. And one more thing is that were parents interested in working with their kids during the lockdown, we experienced it a lot. We are planning if we can, because it's very difficult. The number of villages that you see and the expanse that you see, we cannot guarantee now that all the children have been admitted back to the same school. So, I mean, we wish to do so. Let's see how the resources permit us.
सर तुमचं प्रेझेंटेशन फार सुंदर झालं. मला एवढंच विचारायचं होतं की म्हणजे तुमच्यासारखी कामं करणाऱ्या अशा संस्था आहेत आणि त्यातल्या काही फेसबुकवर पण ॲक्टिव्ह आहेत आणि दिसतंय असं की तुम्ही आत्ता सरकारच्या बाबतीत म्हटलं की सरकारला इथे गन लावली जाते आणि सरकार हे करतंय, पण हे वर्षानुवर्ष चाललंय हो. म्हणजे फेसबुकवर वैशाली मगदूम नावाच्या एक शिक्षिका आहेत, त्यांनी इतकं अप्रतिम पत्र आज सरकारला लिहिलेलं आहे आणि इलेक्शन ड्युटीपासून म्हणजे शिक्षण सोडून जी काही कामं शिक्षकांच्या मागे लावली जातात, म्हणजे ज्ञानदानाचं काम जर शिक्षकांनी केलं आणि इतर कामासाठी जरी कर्मचारी वर्ग नेमला, हे इतकं साधं जर सरकार करू शकलं तर मला मी फारच ले पर्सन आहे, पण मला असं वाटतं की अनेक प्रश्न सुटू शकतील. हे वर्षानुवर्ष आहे. म्हणजे मला वाटतं की माझी आई शिक्षिका होती, उत्तम शिक्षिका होती आणि ती शिक्षिका होऊन म्हणजे आता ती गेली, ती 30 वर्षापूर्वीची मी गोष्ट तुम्हाला सांगते. तिने जे प्रॉब्लेम्स फेस केले ते आज शिक्षक करतायत. तर याबद्दल
वैशाली इज अ गुड फ्रेंड आणि ती खूपच उत्तम शिक्षिका आहे. म्हणजे तिच्या वर्गामध्ये जाऊन बसणं फॉर एनी एज्युकेटर इज अ ट्रीट. म्हणजे खरंच ज्याला शिक्षणशास्त्र कळतं त्याला अशी प्रिन्सिपल्स वर्गामध्ये उभी असलेली दिसतील इतकी चांगली शिक्षिका आहे ती. अँड वेन समबडी लाईक हर राईट्स, ते आपल्याला थोडं समजून घेतलं पाहिजे एक समाज म्हणून सुद्धा. म्हणजे काय आहे की सध्या ज्या प्रकारचं आपल्याला डेटा नावाचा एक भस्म्या रोग झाला आहे आपल्या सिस्टीमला, सॉरी टू यूज दिस वर्ड्स, पण मला राहत नाही आहे म्हणून. सो पण ॲक्च्युली व्हॉट हॅज हॅपन्ड इज दॅट वी आर ट्राईंग टू कन्वर्ट एव्हरीथिंग इन टू नंबर्स, and data is something what we perceive at the bottom. It's something that is to be sent up, never comes down, and nothing happens to that. We are in touch with about more than 2,000 teachers across the state. रोज काही ना काही माहिती वर पाठवणं has become a basic job. I mean, do we really need so much of data to make a good policy decision? That's my question, number one. And what is the reliability of this data if you keep on asking them, you know, every now and then की आज पाठवा, परत पाठवा, परत पाठवा, परत पाठवा. आज जे वैशालीने म्हटलंय ते की अरे शाळा सुरू होण्याच्या आधी एक तुम्ही टेस्ट केलेली होती, आता परत एकदा अध्ययन स्तर निश्चिती करायला सांगताय, तर रोज एक झाड लावलं आणि उपटून बघितलं त्याचं मूळ वाढलंय का तर ते झाड मरणार. As simple as that. I think, you know, I mean, this is a very larger issue that we need to really discuss. The whole thing comes out of distrust in the system. अख्खी सिस्टीम आपण अविश्वासावरच आधारलेली आहे. शिक्षक शिकवणार नाही आहेत आणि म्हणून त्यांना सारखं चेक केलं पाहिजे. शिक्षक शिकवणार नाही आहेत म्हणून मुलांच्या सारख्या परीक्षा घेतल्या पाहिजेत. If that is the attitude that we really carry towards our public education system, I think शिक्षक दबले जाणं आणि त्यांनी अशा तऱ्हेचं काही हे करणं हे. So unless, you know, the society becomes little more sensitive towards the whole thing and towards the public system, I don't think, you know, this is going to change. आपण सगळे लोक जे मध्यमवर्गीय आहोत, थोड्याशा पॉवरफुल पोझिशनमध्ये आहोत असं मी म्हणेन, अशा लोकांनी याबद्दल सेन्सिटिव्हली बोललं जातं का? आपली शिक्षकांच्या बद्दलची, विशेषतः गव्हर्नमेंटच्या शिक्षकांच्या बद्दलची मनातली कल्पना काय आहे? म्हणजे साधी गोष्ट सांगतो, मी सरकारी शाळेचा पालक पण आहे. So my daughter studied in a Zilla Parishad school. So I know, and I had made this as a very conscious choice. तर मला माहिती आहे की ते सिस्टीम असल्याशिवाय you cannot really educate every child. If you want to make right to education a reality, it is only the public system which can make it. आपण अमेरिकेसारख्या अत्यंत कॅपिटलिस्ट देशाचं सुद्धा उदाहरण घेतलं तरी फाउंडेशनल एज्युकेशन इज लार्जली डन बाय द गव्हर्नमेंट. Whereas against, we are right now thinking that, you know, the private schools are better than the government schools. Actually, if you really see that post-COVID, there is an exodus of children coming from these private schools to the government schools at some places because those private schools could not sustain. अत्यंत म्हणजे आपण प्रायव्हेट स्कूलची आपली कल्पना ही इथल्या पुण्यातल्या शाळांवरनं नको करूया. अ प्रायव्हेट स्कूल दॅट इज इन वाडा ऑर इन मोखाडा, कोण असतं तिथे शिकवायला? सो देर आर पीपल हू आर पेड 5,000-6,000 रुपीज इफ द institution is very generous, even less than that sometimes. And what happens is that in a year the child may see 3 teachers. पण त्याला जर असं कुठेतरी चांगले पैसे मिळाले की तो माणूस सोडून जातो. So I mean, let us really understand this model of self-pay kind of a thing is not going to work in the rural areas. I would also like to make a point, a little encroaching on your area, Abhay. Correct me if I am wrong. Yeah. All the people who pay tax to the government, actually like us, carry a double load. In the sense, we pay tax to run this entire government system, but we never make any use of it. म्हणजे आम्ही टॅक्स पण भरायचा, ती शाळा पण चालवायच्या सिस्टमसाठी म्हणून, आणि आपल्या स्वतःच्या मुलाला चांगलं शिकवायला पाहिजे म्हणून प्रायव्हेट शाळेची लाख रुपये फी पण भरायची. सो I mean, we just don't feel that you know, I mean, why that one system should not be really good enough whereby I can admit my child. I mean, this may sound very आदर्शवादी वाटेल अतिशय, पण if घटकाभर धरून चालूया आपण, if we really, you know, convert this entire system into a private sector at this scale of operations, can anybody guarantee me that it will not be worse than what it is today? आपल्याकडे त्याच्याकरताचा चांगला डेटा आहे. फॉर एक्झाम्पल, D.Ed कॉलेजेस ज्याच्यामधनं शिक्षक सगळे आपले येतात, 90% ऑफ देम वेर प्रायव्हेट. What kind of you know, quality that we really got because of privatization in that sector? तर ह्या प्रकारच्या गोष्टींबद्दल आपण बोलत नाही आहोत. सरकारी शिक्षकांच्या बद्दलची एक असूया आहे आपल्या मनामध्ये की त्यांना खूप जास्त पगार मिळतो आणि खूप सुट्या मिळतात त्याच्याबद्दलची, आणि त्याच्याकरता म्हणून लोक गन पॉईंटवरती शिक्षकांना कायम ठेवतात. Now, if this is the case, the whole system cannot run on mistrust. There has to be some basic element of trust. Ultimately, मुलाला शिकवण्याचं काम तो शिक्षकच करणार आहे. There is no other way than to get along with him, however he is. So if we really believe in that, I think शिक्षक जे आता म्हणतायत की आम्हाला शिकवू द्या, असं शिक्षकाला म्हणण्याची वेळ येणं हे काही फार चांगलं गोष्ट लक्षण नाहीये. आणि अनफॉर्च्युनेट पार्ट इज दॅट की समाज त्यांच्या पाठीमागे उभा राहायला पण तयार नाहीये.
नमस्कार सर, मी विष्णू शिंदे. सर, एक अनुभव सांगायचा होता आणि एक प्रश्न होता. तर सुरुवातीला मी अनुभव सांगेन. आम्ही आयसीड फाउंडेशनच्या माध्यमातून उस्मानाबाद जिल्ह्यामध्ये असंच एक प्रयोग केला की आपण जे सर आत्ता रिकमेंडेशन दिलं की प्रिंट मटेरियल जास्तीत जास्त यूज. तर आम्ही सर विकली त्या मुलांना एक आठवड्याभराचा एक प्लॅन द्यायचो आणि मग विकली एकाला आमचा टीचर भेटायला जायचं. असं बऱ्यापैकी सर ते सक्सेसफुल झालेलं असं आमच्या निदर्शनात आलं आहे. आणि प्रश्न असा होता सर की जे आपण आता खूप सारं प्रायमरी एज्युकेशनबद्दल जास्त बोललो आणि ज्यांना नेटवर्क नव्हतंच किंवा ॲसेट नव्हतेच असं, पण ज्यांना ॲसेट होते आणि ज्यांना नेटवर्क होतं यांचे पण म्हणजे क्वालिटी लॉस झाला आहे असं जर आपण म्हणूया. जे की 2-3 उदाहरणं होते की 10वी-12वीची मुलं ऑनलाईन परीक्षा घ्या म्हणून रस्त्यावर उतरत आहेत. त्याच्यानंतर जेव्हा पुणे विद्यापीठामधले काही विद्यार्थी किंवा ग्रॅज्युएशनचे विद्यार्थी ऑनलाईन परीक्षा घ्या हा आग्रह होतो आहे आणि जेव्हा जेव्हा शिक्षक माझे कलिग आहेत खूप सारे सिनियर शिक्षक, ते म्हणतात की कॉपी पेस्ट उत्तरं आहेत. म्हणजे हा लॉस सिनियर कॉलेज लेवलच्या याला आपण म्हणजे कसा भरून काढावा ह्याच्याकडे आपण कसं बघूया. म्हणजे
मी या क्षेत्रातला काही तज्ज्ञ नाही, पण थोड्याशा माझ्या या अनुभवाच्या आधारे मी इतकंच म्हणू शकेन त्याच्यामध्ये की आपल्याकडे चर्चा जेवढी परीक्षांबद्दल झाली कोविडच्या लॉकडाऊनच्या काळात, तेवढी मुलं शिकली नाहीत, त्यांनी त्या प्रोसेसमधनं ती गेलेलीच नाही, त्याच्याबद्दल नाही झाली. वी वर स्टील सेईंग की अरे आम्हाला आमच्या मुलांच्या परीक्षा चांगल्या पास होऊ देत त्याच्यामधनं. तर मुलं शिकली नाही आहेत ही फॅक्ट आपण जोपर्यंत मान्य नाही करत आहोत तोपर्यंत त्या परीक्षा काय वॉटर डाऊन करा, ऑनलाईन घ्या, ऑफलाईन घ्या, या सगळ्या प्रकारामधनं अडचण अशी आहे की आपला मुद्दा काय आहे चर्चेचा. कशीही परीक्षा घ्या तुम्ही, त्या मार्क दिसतील त्याच्यावरती वाढलेले तुमचे, कारण यू हॅव लोअर डाऊन द टेस्ट. पण त्या मुलाला खरंच आयुष्यामध्ये काही त्याचा उपयोग आहे का, हा विचार आपण करत नाही आहोत. आणि येस, आय मीन म्हणजे आपल्याकडे यातला प्रत्येक एक सेक्टर घेतला ना आपण तर एक स्टडी होऊ शकतो, इतकं त्याची ग्रॅव्हिटी आहे. अनफॉर्च्युनेटली आवर युनिव्हर्सिटीज आर नॉट कमिंग फॉरवर्ड टू टेक दिस काइंड ऑफ अ चॅलेंज, असं मला वाटतं. की खरं तर युनिव्हर्सिटीजना आता एकदम म्हणजे काय म्हणतात त्याला की वाईटातनं चांगलं जे बघायचं तर भरपूर अभ्यासाची संधी आहे जर खरंच करायचं म्हटलं तर. आणि ईच ऑफ दीज प्रॉब्लेम्स दॅट वी आर पोजिंग राईट नाव हॅज अ युनिक सिच्युएशन अँड वन नीड्स टू रिअली स्टडी इट वेल. आणि त्याच्यातनं शिकून आपण ज्ञाननिर्मिती करणार का, हा खरा प्रश्न आहे.
For want of time, we'll have just one last question. Anand Akash.
I think your study has thrown up a much larger question, according to me. आणि तेवढा फक्त मी आपल्या पुढे आत्ता मांडतोय, which is about this educational backlog, which goes much beyond what COVID-19 brought about. ट्रिगर आत्ताचा तुमच्या स्टडीचा जो होता तो COVID-19मुळे होता, रिकव्हरिंग एज्युकेशन लॉसेस कॉज बाय COVID-19. पण तुम्ही ज्या प्रकारचं वर्णन केलं आणि most of us here are familiar to some extent at least with the kind of situation that you people have been working in. Tribal and extremely rural areas, undeveloped areas. इथला जो एज्युकेशनचा जो बॅकलॉग आहे विजावी अर्बन एरियाज लाईक पुणे, मुंबई, नाशिक एक्सेट्रा हा तर perpetual आहे. And therefore I think this accumulated backlog of education as far as the field of education is concerned, त्याचा cumulative effect हा huge आहे. It has also led to several other distortions in our society. So do you think, म्हणजे माझ्या मनात आत्ता फक्त एक आला, and Abhay Tilak would know this, about 30-35 years ago जसा एक इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर आणि इकॉनॉमिक डेव्हलपमेंटच्या बाबतीमध्ये एक गव्हर्नमेंट ऑफ महाराष्ट्राने एक कमिटी नेमली होती अंडर द चेअरमनशिप ऑफ डॉक्टर विमा दांडेकर टू मेजर द डेव्हलपमेंट बॅकलॉग विजावी वेस्टर्न महाराष्ट्र विजावी अदर पार्ट्स ऑफ द स्टेट. आणि मग त्याच्यामधून त्यांची काही फाइंडिंग्स आली अँड देन रिॲलोकेशन ऑफ रिसोर्सेस वॉज सॉट टू बी डन ॲट लीस्ट बाय द गव्हर्नमेंट ऑफ महाराष्ट्र. Something similar, do you think, needs to be done to measure this education backlog in remote and tribal areas vis-a-vis other privileged areas like big cities?
Yes, absolutely. And these are academic issues. That is what we have to really understand, that unless we really go into the depth of it, unless we really try to unpack the complexities of these kind of things, the decisions that will be made will be, at a very superficial level. So I completely agree with you that, this kind of a study needs to be undertaken, preferably by the government, because it then carries a lot of credibility. There has been a sort of people who are trying to really sort of do these kind of studies on a smaller scale at a private level. Obviously they don't have that kind of a credibility because it's not done by the government. Not that they lag in the methodology or anything of that sort, but if somebody wants to do it really at a scale, it is only government who can do it. And that's why it makes a lot of sense that we really try to take up this as an issue to be studied well under rigorous academic terms and then come up with the policy suggestions. आज काय होतं म्हणजे माझा अनुभव जो मी दोन्ही लेवलला काम करतो, राज्याच्याही यंत्रणेबरोबर काही काही काम चालू असतं आणि गावातही काही काही काम चालू असतं. तर झालंय असं की ते एवढं प्रेशर आहे राज्याच्या यंत्रणेवरती सातत्याने की काही गोष्टी समजून घ्यायला आपल्याला काळ लागणार आहे. आणि बियॉन्ड ते जैविक प्रक्रिया आहेत, इट्स अ बायोलॉजिकल प्रोसेस, यू कॅनॉट ॲक्सलरेट इट बियॉन्ड द लिमिट. तर हा भाग आपण विसरून गेल्यासारखं सध्या टार्गेट्स देऊन द बेसिक आय थिंक द बेसिक बिलीफ कम्स फ्रॉम द इंडस्ट्री दॅट इफ यू सेट सर्टन टार्गेट्स, सेट सर्टन SOPs, तुम्हाला रिझल्ट मिळाला पाहिजे त्याच्यामधनं. तर broadly, if you really look, it is a very complex kind of a thing that one needs to study, and it is not enough that we really just study the numbers, but also understand it in the qualitative terms. जेव्हा इतके नंबर्स माझ्याकडे येत आहेत तर त्या नंबर्सच्या those numbers represent something, we are completely averse to discussing what is that something. आणि ते करण्यासाठी तुम्ही म्हणताय तसं की खरोखरच तज्ज्ञांनी समोर येऊन बसणं आणि सरकारने त्यांना थोडं एक काय म्हणता येईल त्याला की ॲटलीस्ट स्वातंत्र्य देणं बोलण्याचं आणि करण्याचं आणि काही रिसोर्सेस पुरवणं. दिस इज समथिंग व्हॉट इज डेफिनेटली नीडेड. म्हणजे त्याच्याशिवाय हा सगळा फेनॉमेना समजून घेणं विल बी ॲब्सोल्युटली डिफिकल्ट. म्हणजे आमच्यासारखे लोक जे काम करतात ते देर म्हणजे ते कण पण नाही आहे तेवढं छोटं त्या एकूण प्रॉब्लेमची ग्रॅव्हिटी आणि हे लक्षात घेता.
We'll close this question and answer session with one last comment by Abhay Tilak.
नाही, मी फक्त आपल्या ज्या उस्मानाबादच्या मित्रांनी जो म्हणला, मला तुम्हाला धन्यवाद एवढ्याकरता द्यायचा आहे की इथे क्वेस्टने हा अभ्यास केल्यामुळे निदान अंगणवाडीच्या स्तरावरती लर्निंग लॉस किती झाला आहे याचं काहीतरी झरोका आपल्याला मिळाला आहे. मी आजचं फक्त उदाहरण देतो आणि थांबतो. मी पुण्यातल्या एका नामांकित संस्थेमध्ये MScला इकॉनॉमिक्स शिकवतोय सध्या. शनिवारी त्यांची टेस्ट आहे. मी सहज मुलांना प्रश्न विचारला, 20 मार्काची टेस्ट आहे, तुम्हाला कशा प्रकारचा प्रश्न आवडेल? सगळी कोविडची जनरेशन आहे. सगळे म्हणले लॉंग आन्सर्स प्रश्न देऊ नका. म्हटलं का? ते म्हणजे आमची लिहायची सवय गेली आहे, आमचा पेपर लिहूनच पुरता होत नाही. उदाहरण हे अग्रगण्य संस्थेतलं आहे. आपल्या विद्यापीठामध्ये पण मी शिकवतो. सगळ्या मुलांचा हट्ट आहे की सगळ्या टेस्ट आमच्या ऑब्जेक्टिव्स घ्या, आम्हाला लिहायला लावू नका. सी व्हॉट आय फाइंड इज दिस इज अ एक्स्ट्रीमली डेंजरस ट्रेंड. ability, see, to write an essay type answer, you need a structure, some kind of a discipline for logical thinking. That is not imbibed by short answers, right answer in 100 words, or what we call choose the correct option, multiple MCQs. मला सगळ्यात भीती असं वाटते की वी हॅव नॉट बीन, म्हणजे ॲटलीस्ट हा केवळ अंगणवाडीच्या स्तरावरचा नाही आहे, हा ग्रॅज्युएशन लेवलच्या पातळीवरचा पण हा लॉस आहे. आपल्याला त्याची अजून कल्पना नाही आहे. आणि मला सगळ्यात भीती अशी वाटते की याचा थेट परिणाम या मुलांच्या रोजगार क्षमतेवरती म्हणजे एम्प्लॉयबिलिटीवरती होणार आहे. दुर्दैवाने अशी क्वेस्टसारखी दुसरी संस्था जर आपल्याला उच्च स्तरावरच्या शिक्षणातला लॉस जो गेल्या 2 वर्षात झाला आहे तो बेसिकली रायटिंग ॲबिलिटी, थिंकिंग ॲबिलिटी आणि टू कम अप विथ अ लॉजिकली कन्स्ट्रक्टेड आन्सर, ही सगळी आपली ॲबिलिटी हॅम्पर झालेली आहे. दुर्दैवाने तिची अजून आपल्याला कल्पना पण नाही. थँक्यू. मी चेअरमन सरांच्या परवानगीने बोललो.
I'm standing here only for a few concluding remarks. While I was listening to the presentation by Mr. Nilesh Nimkar, I remembered the research study made by Dr. Abhay Bang. The sample was small, restricted only one taluka, but the research methodology was perfect. So whatever were the findings, they could be used to formulate state policy also. So I think this study was also a similar one. It was stimulated by the pandemic. If they had planned this study without any external stimulation, I think they could have got more encouraging results for policy making. There was one point raised by Abhay Tilak. What is the position in urban schools? I have a survey where they had studied international schools also. And they found that in rural and urban schools, the students had not lost much of their learning in the mother tongue, but had lost a lot in English. In the international schools, they had not lost much learning in English, but there was a significant decrease in their reading, writing, and comprehension of mother tongue. Very interesting observation. One of the solutions for recovery of learning loss has been online learning. But the academic rigor of online learning, at least for school education, the effectiveness has not been confirmed anywhere in the world so far. If it is planned properly, the teaching learning process can present to the students a creative and active environment. But those students who are fortunate enough with the proper technology and gadgets, they only can make use of that process. Socio-economical aspects, behavioral aspects, familial aspects will also have to be considered when we are planning for recovery of these learning losses. Students were interviewed, teachers were interviewed, and I am working in an institution where we do career counseling, and career counselors were interviewed. And unanimously, they said that regular in-person of school education is necessary, not for academics, but for socio-economical and behavioral development of the students. Blended learning has been suggested by some. It gives enriched content, but again it will be only for a few fortunate students, at least for the next decade or two, I think. While we are planning for recovery of learning losses, we have been studying impact on students. But if the plan has to be fruitful, we'll have to see the impact on teachers of this pandemic, impact on school settings. Nilesh Nimkar talked about ashram schools, but other schools also there has been significant impact. And after the pandemic is over, which resources have to be used in school, availability of those resources, access to those resources, and how to include all the student population in this enriched atmosphere. Whatever experiments you have been doing for the last 6 or 8 months after the pandemic started retreating, we have found that most of the schools who are switching to activity-based learning in the first instance, then project-based learning, and what Nilesh Nimkar has suggested for these tribal schools, but that will be useful everywhere. Education, not according to standards defined by the board, but levels of achievement of the students. That has been useful in rural schools and urban schools everywhere. And I think when we are planning for recovery, we have to use this three-pronged approach of activity-based learning, project-based learning, and level-based education. If we think about these three steps collectively and also in decentralized way in different schools, I think it will take another 3 or 4 years where all the recovery of learning losses can be achieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of Pune International Center, I would like to extend a hearty vote of thanks to our chairperson this evening, Dr. Girish Bapat, who spared time from his busy schedule to grace the occasion. Thank you to our distinguished speakers, Mr. Nilesh Nimkar and Mr. Abhay, Tilak, for sharing your thoughts. This was truly a thought-provoking discussion. Last but not the least, thank you to Team PIC and to our lovely audience for making this event a success. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.